Welcome to Sputnik, orbiting the world with me, George Galloway.
And me, Gayatri.
The bodies have been buried. The shooting, for now at least, has stilled. But the reverberations of the killings in Paris are far from being played out.
In France, more than 100 attacks on Muslims and their properties have been reported. Well, not reported by the mainstream media, if you know what I mean. There has been mayhem in Belgium, and the head of British Security Service says it's almost inevitable that a similar disaster is on its way to us.
We appear locked in an intractable conflict. We can go blindly forwards, or we can embrace the dictum that when you're in a hole, the first thing you should do is stop digging. Joining us now to reflect on this is one of the world's leading Muslim analysts and its most eloquent spokesman, the head of the Cordoba Foundation, Anas Altakriti. Anas, welcome back to the Sputnik. It is still reverberating, isn't it? The Charlie Hebdo magazine is about to be published and sold in Britain with inevitable protests. I myself addressed a mass rally in Bradford last weekend, making the point that we utterly condemn the harming, let alone the killing of anyone for anything they've said, written, drawn. These are provocations. These are not cartoons. These are obscene and pornographic representations of a prophet held dear by almost 2 billion people in the world. It's asking for trouble.
Well, George, first of all, Gayatri, thank you very much for inviting me back on the programme. You're absolutely right. I think you've hit the nail on the head. I mean, since when did Europe measure its progress, civility, liberty and development on the basis of its capacity and aptitude to hurl insult and offend others? And plus, it's a mirage. Free speech is a lie. When at the very rally, the 1.5 million march in Paris to condemn those atrocious attacks, called the Freedom of Speech rally, when the BBC correspondent there couldn't even dare ask a question without being reprimanded and forced to apologise. I mean, the irony is stark. It's not about freedom of speech. It's here, I mean, we're talking about something that unfortunately we have totally lost control over, and that is how we behave ourselves. I mean, we thought it was exclusive to the political class. We thought that only politicians can talk about democracy while supporting dictatorships, can talk about human rights while exercising torture, can talk about liberty and freedom while censoring. We thought it was only exclusive to politicians. It seems that actually societies as a whole are led by a media narrative that tells them to behave in a particular way, that it's okay or not okay to do or say. And unfortunately today, you sort of forget exactly what it is that we're fighting for. As societies, what do we stand for anymore? When your measure of freedom is, you know, your ability to actually offend, insult the most sacred figures and icons of 3 million people who live amongst you, whom you live amongst, who share your neighborhoods, who share the marketplace from which you shop, who share the restaurants, you know, at which you eat, and so on and so forth. It's quite disgusting, the level of vitriol that actually guides us. And I fear what we're calling on is more and more divisions, more and more apprehension,
fear,
probably. Well, fear, and probably even out of those millions will appear again a handful of idiots who choose to take things in their own hands and seek vengeance, which everyone condemns. But ultimately, you'll have to say, listen, if you poke someone in the eye once too many, you have to expect a response.
Well, the security service have made that clear, that it's almost inevitable. This is their words, that something like this is going to happen in Britain. And the former head of the security services, Sawyer, said that these cartoons are a provocation. But you go on.
Well, Charlie Hebdo sells itself as a satirical magazine. In the UK, we've also got a similar satire magazine called The Private Eye. Do you think it's in the same league?
Not at all. I mean, Private Eye is a publication. You know, if you go decades back, it has a long-standing tradition in poking fun at politicians, in expressing people's own bewilderment with the way that politicians are acting, with the political class, with the kind of you know, silly and stupid statements that politicians get. I mean, it's a totally different thing. This is directed towards Muslims everywhere around the world.
Muslims and black people. This cannot be forgotten. Hebdo's caricaturing of black people is utterly racist, whether they're Muslim
Wasn't it the
or
French
not.
minister, the black French minister, whom they depicted as an ape?
They depicted her as an ape. The girls in Nigeria who were kidnapped were caricatured as welfare queens with pregnant bellies, saying, when do I get my benefits, and so on. This is a racist, hypocritical, scurrilous magazine with one agenda only, to attack the already marginalized, to attack the already vulnerable and weak, rather than the real job of a satirist, which I would argue is what Private Eye does, of holding the powerful and the rich to account. Absolutely. We've got the front page here, which sums it up perfectly. There's that march in Paris to which you referred. Je suis charlatan, they're saying. We are charlatans. You were too kind to them. Netanyahu was at the front of the march. He killed 17 journalists in Gaza just last summer. The Saudi ambassador was at the front of the march. They're flogging people for blogging. The Prime Minister and President of several African countries who routinely jail and worse journalists, and yet there they are marching for freedom.
We have a problem, and that problem is that now, whilst hypocrisy was it was something that was quite a shameful label to carry.
Yes.
It seems that now people don't really mind it, and don't really mind showing that they don't mind it. I mean, the people there, you know, people who actually have blood on their hands, arriving at a scene where people are supposedly talking about the freedom of speech. I mean, most of the people leading that particular line were people who wouldn't allow, or in fact, actively close down areas and spaces for people to express themselves. So being there is as though I'm, you know, sending a message. I'm not only going to oppress you, I'm going to, you know, sort of celebrate being here while suppressing you. I don't even care about being accused of oppressing you anymore. And that is where I think we have a real problem. And my hope was, and I have to say that sectors of the media have behaved incredibly responsibly. And, you know, the responses to some of the idiotic statements and tweets made by people like Rupert Murdoch, like Steve Emerson of late, who spoke of Birmingham as being an entirely Muslim city.
He hounded me for many decades as a terrorism expert, and he thought that Birmingham, the United Kingdom, was
a no-go
city.
area for non-Muslims. I mean, these people. When they spoke, the massive response that came from non-Muslims to them. You know, the way that J.K. Rowling, for instance, said, you know, if I have to be responsible for Rupert Murdoch, the way that he held the entire Muslim community responsible for those criminals in France, then, you know, it's amazing.
Let's go deeper, because time is short. This is located in the so-called war on terror, the invasion and occupation of one Arab and Muslim country after another. These things don't come out of thin air. Western countries like ours, like the United States, and France latterly, have been deeply implicated in the invasion, occupation of Arab countries, Muslim countries, in the buttressing of dictatorships in other Muslim countries against their people. And the motivation of these lunatics, these criminals who did all this in Paris, was itself born out of that. They told us so in their videos. Are we locked into this constant war, and is it going to get worse?
Well, unless we change our ways, George. I mean, in your introduction, you said it. I mean, now, what, 13, 14 years on, year on year, if we are to believe everything the intelligence services tell us, things are getting worse. More and more recruits, more and more sympathise to the terrorist cause. More and more attacks are being fought. That's what they tell us, at least. We don't know the reality. So if we're to believe that, it means that for the past 13 years, year on year, there has been a failure. But no one is brave enough to stand up and say, hang on, we've got it wrong, we must think in a different way. I mean, I think it was the former French Prime Minister, de Villepin, a brilliant politician, someone whom I have immense regard, because he was with us, remember, at the time of the war in Iraq, and his opposition.
The dignity of his speech,
and the way in which he spoke, while still the smoke was churning out of those places in Paris, and he said, this isn't the fault of Islam, it's the fault of Western policies going absolutely berserk and creating, anomalies such as ISIS and others in the Middle East. Someone like him needs to be heard more. It's actually the fact that these people, first of all, they are products of Europe, not of some Muslim country. In fact, in that particular scene, the product of a Muslim country was the guy who protected the Jews in the kosher shop and led them to safety, to save their lives. That was the product of a Muslim land, Mali. Otherwise, the killers, if we again are to believe who they are and their backgrounds, they're products of British societies, of French societies, of European societies. Why blame Islam? Most Muslims around the world don't behave that way. Most Muslims around the world, whilst being grossly offended by Charlie Hebdo, never went and attacked anyone haphazardly in the street. Never. In fact, only a couple of days ago, I was having this debate with a local councillor who was very, very much against, the presence of Muslims in our locality. I said to him, listen, there are hundreds of thousands of British expats who live, work, and spend their entire lives in Muslim countries. Wouldn't it be easy if that were the tendency, the DNA, the intrinsic, instinctive reaction of Muslims to basically set upon those people within the Muslim community who he believed, believed in Sharia law and believed in attacking all non-Muslims? Wouldn't that be the case? But we never hear of that, simply because Muslims are not so inclined. And we need to understand that these people weren't radicalized because of a passage they read in the Quran or something they heard of the Prophet. It was because they saw images of Abu Ghraib. It was because of the stories they heard coming out from Guantanamo. It was because they heard that their own government had committed atrocities in various countries, including Muslim countries, and they became in the way that they did. That's no justification, but we need to understand how this is created, and we need to understand that unless we change course, this might happen again.
Final word, literally 10 seconds. What's your view on Chilcot being postponed?
I think it's because it'll cost in the coming election. I think that truth hasn't been found. I think truth wasn't even sought at some stage. That's no condemnation of Lord Chilcot himself, but the whole inquiry and its remit, I don't think it really wanted to get to the bottom of what happened in 2003, which may turn out to be, and I think it is, the crime of our time.
I told you he was eloquent. Anas Altakriti, thank you very much.
Thank you,
for joining us. Coming up after the break, he's been